Labour has prioritised Muslim votes over the lives of the Pakistani rape gang victims. Labour has chosen to save its own councillors over getting justice for Pakistani rape gang victims. Those aren't just my views. They're the views of the former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Trevor Phillips.
I think what the government is doing on that question is utterly, utterly shameful. Really? Utterly shameful. And it is so obviously political. It's so obvious that they're not doing this because of the demographic of the people involved. As Katie Lamb, the Tory MP, said yesterday, largely Pakistani Muslim in background, and also in Labour-held seats and councils.
They're also the views of Tory MP Esther McVey. Labour refused a national grooming gang inquiry, but they promised to have 5 local inquiries.
So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries.
Then, as you all know, Jess Phillips pulled the rug on that at the last minute before MPs went off on their Easter holidays.
We'll set out the process through which local authorities can access the £5 million national fund to support locally led work on grooming gangs. Following feedback from local authorities, the fund will adopt a flexible approach to support both full independent local inquiries and more bespoke work.
Well, here's one revelation for you. More people are now in prison for disorder in Rotherham this summer than were ever prosecuted for raping and abusing young girls as part of Pakistani rape gangs in the same town. How mental is that? Now, I don't know how Jess Phillips lived with herself over this, to be honest with you. She made a big song and dance over female victims of violence, reading their names out in Parliament.
Sabita Thanwani, Yasmin Begum, Shatira Bibi, Sherry Bruce, Helen Laurie.
She practically cried into Beth Rigby's bosom on Sky News after Elon Musk said that she should be locked up for not doing enough on the Pakistani rape gangs.
Is this worth it? And I'm saying it to my husband. I'm saying, is it, like, but it's just a process you have to go through each and every time.
Does seem like it's all about her there a bit, doesn't it? But hundreds of thousands of predominantly British working-class white girls who were passed around like pieces of meat by predominantly Pakistani men won't get justice now. How do you think they'll feel about some of Jess Phillips's antics in Parliament? I believe we can show you some theatrics, really, some quite performative outrage, performative upset, I think. Look at her there, getting a bit... Look, how would you describe that? I don't know. Quite snarling in some ways, I suppose you could say. Yeah, I think it's quite strange behaviour, that, for someone who has basically just stood up and pulled the rug on the grooming gang inquiries. We all know which side Labour's bread is buttered. It seems as though the Muslim vote means more to them than the lives of young working-class white girls. But I have another theory. I think it might be about compensation. One Rotherham survivor was awarded £425,000 in compensation after she sued her rapist. So if we take that as a benchmark for compensation and we say that there are 100,000 victims, which, given the fact that the abuse has been taking place in more than 50,000 cities across the country for decades, I don't think that's an unreasonable number there to assume that there's about 100,000 victims and survivors. The compensation would be around £42.5 billion. But this leads me on to tonight's big GBNews exclusive. The taxpayer-funded legal aid paid to the legal representatives acting for a single Rotherham grooming gang has topped £600,000, and the costs are set to soar further. Ringleader Mohammed Imran Ali Akhtar was handed a whopping £143,500 to fund his defence at trial between 2017 and 2019. These are new figures released in a GBNews Freedom of Information request. He was caged for 23 years in 2018 for a string of previous sex offences against young girls. But that total that I outlined there does not include costs for a separate trial last year in which he was handed a further 12-year stretch for raping a vulnerable 13-year-old girl he had plied with drugs and alcohol. His sentence is set to run concurrently. Nabil Khurshid was jailed for 19 years for rape and indecent assault. He got £65,000 for his legal aid help between 2016 and 2018. Ikhlaq Yusuf was found guilty of 2 rapes and indecent assaults and was caged for 20 years. He received £60,147 to pay his legal fees between 2016 and 2020, including £516 for an appeals advocate. Tanweer Ali was found guilty of 2 rapes, 2 indecent assaults and 1 charge of false imprisonment. Jailed for 14 years, got just shy of £100,000 from you, the taxpayer, between 2017 and 2019 to help pay for his solicitors and barristers. Reports at the time stated that Ali appeared to fall asleep as victim impact statements were read at his sentencing. So you could argue there that you paid for his legal representation so he could take a nap whilst his victims spoke in court. Salah Ahmed El Hakam, 45, was jailed for 15 years for rape. His legal team received just shy of £79,000. Asif Ali was found guilty of 2 counts of indecent assault and sentenced to 10 years. He got just over £73,500 in legal aid funding. A 7th defendant who cannot be named for legal reasons was found guilty of 2 rapes, and he received a whopping £90,849, including £1,170, again, for an appeals advert. So the total legal aid bill for the 7 sex beasts adds up to an astonishing £611,000. You're paying for that. You also pay the wages of Jess Phillips, Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer as well. And has there ever been a bigger, more barefaced betrayal of the Pakistani rape gang victims than what Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party has just served up? Let's get the thoughts from our panel this evening. Director of Popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood. We've got businessman and activist Adam Brooks and journalist and broadcaster Nina Mishkov. So, look, quite a few different things to get stuck into there. I'll come to you, Mark, on the first aspect of it. I mean, the betrayal, really, by Labour. Why do you think it is? Is it, as Trevor Phillips says, which is that it's to appease the Muslim vote and it's to make sure that Labour councillors or whoever else will never face accountability? Would you sit on that camp?
Very interesting for Trevor Phillips to say that. Not usually somebody who goes on the warpath against Labour, of course. Yeah. I think there's a mixture of things here. There's 1 million cans of worms that will be opened if there is a proper national inquiry, or even a privately led national inquiry, which Rupert Lowe's trying to pull together. So it may be the Muslim vote, but it will also be endless numbers of people in the political process, probably in the social services, in the police force, in the state bureaucracy, who turned a blind eye. And the minute you start opening one can of worms, you'll open all of them. So partly the Labour vote, but partly there are a huge number of public sector workers who I think will face jail.
I know, if you just have a look at Jess Phillips' seat, you have a look, in fact, I was around that area yesterday, and you've got that cluster of MPs there in Birmingham. You've got the Justice Minister, Shabana Mahmood, you've got Jess Phillips' seat, you've got Tahir Ali's seat, you've got quite a few of them, Liam Byrne, huge local Muslim population, many of whom are already saying that they're not going to vote Labour over the Gaza issue. You also look at the likes of Wes Streeting, Health Minister, only won his seat by something like 500 votes last time around as a result of a independent candidate, pro-Palestine candidate called Diane Mohammed, standing against him. I wonder whether or not they've basically said here, we will not have a grooming gangs inquiry because we don't want to upset the Muslim vote, because we'd lose our seats.
There is that as well. But also, I believe, and I did a video yesterday on X, that Labour are involved in this scandal up to their necks. As you say, it's from councillors to wherever in that party. People covered it up. There were people involved, apparently. This could finish the Labour Party. If there was a proper national inquiry and, dozens of councillors were prosecuted and found guilty, this could end Labour as a political force. Or
there was a reckoning of things like, email chains, if they've not already been shredded, obviously. Yep. Email chains, interactions, what people knew. It's not just about the actual direct perpetrators here, whoever they may or may not be. It's about the complicity in that and any potential subsequent cover-up. And I suppose, Nina, from an outsider looking into it, it would look as though the Labour Party is very scared about what that might unearth, and they've run away from it.
I don't know that they have run away from it. There was a much discussion earlier in the year about should there be an inquiry. And I think the general consensus was that local-led inquiries were more resourceful and got better results because local people knew and could deal with it. They've said they're putting $5 million towards it, and they've said that they'll be able to choose how that money is spent. Now, they're not going to spend the money on wider pavements. They're spending the money on this problem. So there's that something.
Have to volunteer themselves to be investigated, and that is going to be an issue for a lot of those areas. Because why would you want to do that?
I think they will volunteer because why not? And let's face it.
Because they might.
No. Because I think it's in everybody's interest that as you say, you pick the rock up and look at the worms below. But the thing is, you say that it's going to finish the Labour Party. Might I point out that the original exposure was done by the Times in 2011.
Yes.
And it caused the first inquiry, which there was. The 10-year anniversary was last year. And all of those cases could have been brought were under the Conservative government. It's nothing to do with Labour in that case.
The other aspect of what I mentioned earlier tonight, which is this GBNews exclusive based on a Freedom of Information request, which shows that more than £600,000 of your money, taxpayers' money, has been given to just one rape gang in Rotherham. Just one. And you think... The victims themselves are now quite possibly never going to get justice. Labour has pulled the rug on it seems, at the very last moment. And yet, if you are a perpetrator of one of these vile gangs, you can get, in some cases, more than £100,000 in legal aid.
Taxpayer cash. I mean, it looks on the face of it to be a complete disgrace, doesn't it, Patrick? I mean, people must be furious seeing those numbers. There is a problem there, right, that under our justice system, quite rightly, we ensure that everybody has legal representation. I mean, it's the alternative to say if you're charged with a grim crime, you don't get a lawyer. I think the scale of the numbers that GBNews has unearthed there tells us something that I've often said about our legal system. It is too slow and it is too expensive. These sort of cases should not take this long and shouldn't cost this much. It's absolutely ludicrous. Justice delayed is justice denied. And we now have a justice system, a court system, that is ludicrous. It takes years for things to get done, and lawyers are making an absolute fortune out of it. It's got to be quicker and cheaper.
Yeah, taxpayers don't consent to that, and they also, I dare say, do not consent to the wages of those politicians that have ultimately made a decision not to have this inquiry.
No, look, one thing I will say is because of GB News and the subsequent attention that's come from the last 6 months, people in this country now know that this is one of the biggest scandals that have ever hit this country. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of young white working class girls targeted by foreign men and Pakistani rape gangs. And the fact that our taxpayers' money is going to defend these criminals, I believe that once found guilty, we should have clawed back some of that money from their assets, from their houses, from their cars, whatever we can. Should have been.
And the other thing to compare it to, of course, is the paltry $5 million on the table for a local inquiry. $5 million.
That's
the biggest scandal in our nation.
That's true. $5 million for that, $600,000 just for one of these grooming gangs.
I was going to say, the thing is, you have to remember the victims in all of this, and whatever government's been in power, whatever council has been, corrupt. These people, these girls have actually suffered, and it's completely wrong.
It is.
But they've been let down not just by the Labour government. Been let down by every government.
Every council was Labour. Let's just tell them.
All right. Look, I just think this time they came as close as they possibly could. It was the more difficult decision for Labour to pull this at the last minute than it would have been to just go ahead with it. And you have to ask yourselves why they did that. The Legal Aid Agency said legal aid is not paid directly to the individual and recipient of legal aid. It is paid to legal representatives to ensure access to justice and, in criminal cases, to ensure a fair trial. We went to the Home Office as well. They said it's wholly wrong to claim the government is cancelling local child sex abuse inquiries. We will pursue justice for victims without fear or favour, and claims that we would not do so to avoid offering any group... inquiry to avoid offending any group are false. This government is taking decisive action to finally tackle grooming gangs, strengthening the Child Sexual Exploitation Police Task Force, giving victims more powers to have their cases reviewed and making it a criminal offence to cover up any reports of child sexual abuse. We have also commissioned a rapid national audit led by Baroness Casey to uncover the true scale of grooming gangs in the UK today, including looking at ethnicity. And we are providing £5 million to help support local inquiries so we can deliver the meaningful change that victims deserve. Well,